The trap of intelligence, the mistake geniuses always make. We live in a world where intelligence alone is no longer enough. Brilliant people make disastrous decisions. Geniuses stumble over their own genius and wisdom. Seems increasingly rare amid the noise. But what if the ancient Stoic philosophers had already foreseen all of this? In this video, we will delve into the stories and lessons that show why even the most intelligent can act foolishly, and what Stoicism has to teach us to avoid falling into the same trap. Get ready to reflect, challenge yourself, and perhaps see yourself in a new light. If you enjoy philosophy, ancient wisdom, and want to learn how to apply Stoicism in your daily life, subscribe to the channel now and activate the bell. Because here, we transform thoughts into practice and ideas into inner strength. 1. The irony of intelligence. They say that intelligence is a lighthouse, but even the lighthouse, if it looks too much at itself, can become blinded by its own light. Intelligent people do stupid things all the time. It's almost a cosmic irony. The more the mind prides itself on its clarity, the more easily it stumbles over its own shadow. History is full of geniuses who got lost within their certainties. Kings, philosophers, scientists, visionaries, all at some point confused wisdom with infallibility, as if the simple act of knowing were the same as understanding. But it isn't. Knowledge can place you at the top of the mountain, and yet leave you blind to the abyss just ahead. The ancient Greeks, with their golden language and eternal tragedies, even had a word for it. Hybris, the sin of arrogance, the poison of those who believe themselves above error. And the punishment always came the same: the fall. Not for lack of intelligence, but for excess of confidence. Because the real danger is not in ignorance, it is in absolute certainty. When man thinks he has understood the world, it is the world that begins silently to laugh at him. And perhaps that's why the wise of the past spoke so much about emptying oneself, about learning to unlearn. But how to do that in a time when everyone wants to prove they are right? It is then that an ancient story about a simple cup of tea begins to reveal a secret that goes far beyond words. 2. The overflowing Cupid. Is said that once upon a time, a young apprentice went to visit an old Zen master. He arrived full of questions, theories, and certainties. The master received him in silence. He simply picked up a kettle and began to serve tea. The smoke rose slowly, as if time had stopped. The student observed until he realized that the master did not stop pouring. The tea rose reached the edge of the cup and overflowed. It fell onto the table, trickled down to the floor. Desperate, the student shouted, "Stop! The cup is full. There's no room for anything else." The old man smiled. "Exactly," he replied. "And your mind is like this cup." That small scene, so simple, was a powerful metaphor. The young man believed he was in search of wisdom, but he came carrying too much baggage: opinions, dogmas, theories, immutable truths. And, like any full mind, he had no space for anything new. Epictetus would say, centuries later, "You cannot learn what you think you already know." And this is perhaps one of the greatest traps of intelligence, confusing knowledge with fullness. The wise man who believes he knows everything becomes as rigid as the clay cup that, when trying to hold more, simply cracks. But the danger is not just in overflowing, it is also in the taste of what is stored. Because, as the poet Horace reminded us, if the vessel is not clean, everything poured into it will turn sour. And what would the mind be if not that vessel? A vessel of thoughts that, if not washed from time to time, turns pure ideas into bitter arrogance. And this is where the true Stoic dilemma arises: how to clear the mind in a world that constantly fills us with certainties. The poison of certainties. Have you ever noticed how the human mind loves to create shortcuts? It's as if it says, "No need to think again. I already know how this ends." And that's exactly where the mistake begins. These mental shortcuts, biases, prejudices, automatic certainties are like small, invisible poisons. They act slowly, silently, until one day we realize that we no longer think. We just react. It's the autopilot of arrogance. The Stoic knew this. Epictetus warned, "Test every impression that comes to you. Do not accept everything you feel nor everything you think, because the mind is a great actress, and sometimes it stages a truth that never existed. Preconceptions are dirty filters. They distort the light of reality like a foggy glass. You look at the world and believe you are seeing clearly, but what you see is only the reflection of your beliefs. And the worst part is that the more intelligent a person is, the more sophisticated their illusions are. The closed mind doesn't need walls. It is the prison itself. And the ego, that elegant jailer, whispers, "You already know. You are right. There's nothing to learn." And there you go. The cup fills up again. But Stoicism offers a subtle way out. Distrust yourself. Doubt your own truths, test your own instincts, clear your gaze until the world becomes simple and true again. Because sometimes the poison of certainties doesn't kill us. It just puts us to sleep until the day when the fatigue of the mind turns into the collapse of the spirit. If this message makes sense to you, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Here we talk every week about Stoicism, philosophy, and the power of mastering your emotions. Take a deep breath, stay with me. The Collapse of Geniuses, John Stuart. Mill was one of those minds that seemed to have been shaped by the gods. At the age of 7, he read Plato in the original Greek. At 8, he was already writing in Latin and discussing philosophy with the adults in the house. At 17, he was an admired prodigy, a brilliant orator, a name that promised to change the world. But no one saw the price that the brilliance demanded. Behind the words, there was an exhausted young man, crushed by the weight of expectations. One day, he looked at himself in the mirror and asked a simple and terrible question. If I achieve everything I've always wanted, will it make me happy? The silence that followed was the answer. The prodigy collapsed. It collapsed. The mind that knew everything suddenly no longer knew how to live. The same happens to many who confuse ambition with purpose. Elon Musk, for example. The man who builds rockets, electric cars, and empires also seems to fight silent battles against his own excess. Endless hours of work, stress without pause, stimuli without rest. It's like lighting 1,000 candles inside your head. The flame illuminates, but it also consumes the oxygen, and the body, poor thing, screams. But the genius, in his haste to win, calls that cry weakness. Until one day, the body shuts down and silence prevails. The ancients called this modern hubris, the moment when man believes he can surpass the limits of his own nature. But the price of greatness is always the same, the loss of balance. And it is precisely in this imbalance that the Stoic raises his lantern to show that true wisdom does not arise from power, but from the ability to listen. When power closes its ears, imagine a young man sitting on a golden throne, surrounded by marble columns and voices calling him divine. This young man is Nero, Emperor of Rome. At first he listened. To his right, Commander Burrus; to his left, the philosopher Seneca, two men who guided him with wisdom and prudence. During those early years, Rome flourished. They called that time the 5 golden years of Nero. But gold, when polished too much, begins to reflect the face of the observer. And Nero came to fall in love with his own image. The counsel of the wise no longer sounded like guidance, but like criticism. The silence of those who disagreed became the sound he liked to hear the most. There is an ancient sculpture that shows Seneca standing, teaching the young emperor. Nero, hooded, leaning back in the chair, bored. The master speaks. The student tunes out. It is the exact portrait of the moment when wisdom stops being heard and the ego takes the throne. And what happens when the powerful mind refuses to be contradicted? Power loses the mirror of reason and falls in love with its own voice. History shows. The same ear that once listened to advice now only hears applause. And it wasn't just Nero. Centuries later, Commodus, son of Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor, would repeat the same mistake. He ignored his advisors, dismissed the wise, and surrounded himself with flatterers. The result? The empire plunged into darkness. The Stoics called this the blindness of the throne. When power speaks so loudly that it drowns out conscience, and this is not just a problem for emperors. Anyone who refuses to listen has already built their own little empire of ignorance. Because when ears close, the world begins to repeat the same mistakes, and old tragedies resurface dressed in the modern clothes of our time. 6. Echoes of the past. In modern chaos, we tend to think that we live in unique times, that the world has never been so chaotic, that people have never been so manipulated, that the truth has never been so distant. But if we listen carefully, there is an echo coming from the ruins of Athens and the dusty streets of Rome. And it whispers, "This has all happened before." The ancients also had their sophists, men with beautiful speech and murky intentions, who sold opinion as wisdom. There were demagogues, masters in the art of igniting the fire of the crowd. There were charlatans who promised salvation in exchange for worship. And even in that era of marble and parchment, the most intelligent fell into these traps. Seneca, the philosopher who advised emperors, ended up ensnared by Nero's poisonous charm. Plato, the great idealist, traveled to Syracuse believing he could transform a tyrant into a philosopher, and was imprisoned for his naivete. History repeats itself. Only the costumes change. Today, the sophists are on the screens. The crowds do not gather in the squares, but on the networks. The new voices of reason sell certainties in short videos and shout wisdom in capital letters. And we, so modern, so informed, click, like, share, and believe. The Stoics knew the danger of being carried away by the tide. Rusticus, Marcus Aurelius's teacher, warned him, "Beware of the skilled talkers. Put every impression to the test, because what was once a preacher on the corner is now an invisible algorithm. And the challenge is the same. Resist the comfort of following the crowd. Keep a clear gaze amidst the smoke of hysteria. But there is something even deeper in this collective blindness, something that begins within each of us. In the wounds we never heal, and that, without realizing it, end up guiding our decisions. The wounds that govern the adult. There is a boy inside every powerful man, and often it is this boy, wounded, rejected, scared, who makes the decisions when the world expects maturity. Elon Musk, Alexander da Vinci, names that shine like constellations in the sky of history. But if you look more closely, you will see something in common among them: the shadow of childhood. Musk grew up amidst violence and loneliness, trying to prove to himself that he was worthy of respect. Alexandra was shaped by the pressure of surpassing an impossible father and pleasing a demanding mother. He marched to the ends of the earth trying to win the love he never received. And Leonardo, a genius rejected by his own father, spent his life seeking a patron who would see him as a son. The wound of the past is like an invisible general commanding the army of our choices. She whispers in the adult's ear, "Achieve more. Prove you are enough. Don't stop now." And the adult obeys, without realizing that they are just trying to heal an old pain. But there comes a moment when the mirror demands honesty. You can wear expensive suits, drive rockets, paint masterpieces, but if you don't take care of the child that still cries inside you, it will eventually bring down your empire from within. The Stoics called it self-mastery, but at its core, It was something even simpler, recognizing one's own wounds before they take the helm. Because the real danger is not the childhood we lived. It's the childhood we never let go. And while we fight against ghosts of the past, another silent enemy grows around us, one that no longer dwells in the heart, but invades our eyes and thoughts every day, disguised as information. The diet of the modern mind imagined waking up and, before even taking a deep breath, diving into a sea of voices, notifications flashing, headlines screaming, opinions at war. It's the breakfast of the digital age. And the main course is indignation. We live feeding the brain a dangerous mix of noise and anxiety. We call this information, but the right name might be intoxication. Each scroll is a spoonful of chaos. Each video a new seasoning of fear or anger. And little by little, our minds become obese with stimuli and famished for meaning. The ancients feared contaminated bread. We eat contaminated thoughts every day. The algorithm serves the feast, and we sit happily at the table, unaware of the poison in the seasoning. Even the leaders, those who should be the most lucid, get lost in the confusion. Think of Donald Trump, devouring headlines and opinion shows, shaping his decisions by the flavor of the latest news. Or in Jimmy Carter, the opposite, drowning in endless reports, reading every detail to exhaustion. On one side, the superficial noise. On the other, drowning in excess. Two sides of the same poison. The Stoics would have called this a mental diet. What you consume with your eyes and ears shapes your character. Epictetus would warn, "It is not what happens outside that corrupts you, but what you let in." And if Marcus Aurelius had lived in our times, he might have written something like, "Beware of what feeds your soul, for the bread of misinformation is sweet in the mouth and bitter in the heart." But there is another kind of wisdom, one that is not found on screens, in data, or in news, and that an old philosopher from Athens learned in the worst possible way. The wisdom that irritates Socrates was the kind of man who would enter a room and make the air denser, not out of arrogance, but because of that unsettling way of looking at you and asking the obvious as if it were a mystery. He dismantled certainties with the delicacy of a surgeon and the cruelty of a mirror. And no one likes to see themselves naked in front of the truth. They say the Oracle of Delphi called him the wisest of men because he knew that he knew nothing. But that same gift, that sharp lucidity, was also his curse. Socrates asked too many questions, mocked too much, exposed too much. He not only challenged the powerful, he made them look foolish in front of the crowd. In the dialogues, the interlocutors were not colleagues, they were victims. He stripped them of their illusions until only embarrassment remained. And so, drop by drop, the poison of antipathy accumulated. When he was finally judged, he had the chance to plead for clemency, but he preferred to provoke the jury. He said that instead of being condemned, he should be rewarded for teaching the truth, and with that, he sealed his own fate. The historian Macaulay wrote, "The more I hear about Socrates, the less surprised I am that they killed him. Perhaps he understood the human soul, but he ignored the hearts of men. He knew how to think, but he didn't know how to touch. And the world does not forgive those who make it feel small." Benjamin Franklin, on the other hand, mastered another form of wisdom and the art of pleasing. Brilliant, yes, but also lighthearted, sociable, loved by both kings and commoners. He understood that the true wise man is not the one who wins arguments, but the one who wins hearts. And that is why, centuries later, many others would seek to reproduce what Franklin discovered, the transformative power that arises when minds unite around a purpose. The circle that sharpens, used in a discreet house in Rome. Under the flickering light of oil lamps, a group of men gathered in secret. They were soldiers, poets, philosophers, restless spirits seeking more than glory. They called that group the Scipionic Circle, in honor of Scipio, the general who led them. There, amidst wine goblets and rolls of parchment, they discussed justice, virtue, and destiny. They recited verses, exchanged ideas, challenged each other, and, more than friends, they became mirrors to each other, sharpening each other like sharp blades. They knew iron sharpens iron, and no man becomes wise alone. Centuries later, Benjamin Franklin would create his own circle, the junto, where merchants and inventors would meet to exchange knowledge and refine character. From Emerson to the transcendentalists, from literary clubs to modern fraternities, they all followed the same ancient principle. Wisdom multiplies when it is shared. But the ego hates these gatherings. He whispers that we don't need anyone, that we already know enough, that we are masters among apprentices. And that's when the man begins to become foolish again. Epictetus warned, "It is impossible to learn what you believe you already know." The ego is the enemy, the master of self-deception. He wants to speak when the soul needs to listen, wants to shine, when the spirit needs to be silent. The Stoic, on the contrary, remains a learner, seeks humility, discomfort, the naked truth. Walk with those who challenge you, not with those who idolize you, because the wise understand growing is an act of courage, and listening is the noblest form of strength. And it is on this path of self-mastery, between the voice of the ego and the call of empathy, that the most powerful Stoic virtue emerges. The ability to see the world through the eyes of another. And if you made it this far, congratulations. Few have the patience and curiosity to seek wisdom in a world that only wants haste. I hope this video made you think, feel, and question a little more. If you liked it, leave a like, share it with someone who needs to hear this, and subscribe to the channel so we can continue together on this journey of self-mastery, philosophy, and inner strength. Because, in the end, knowing is good, but applying is being wise. Until the next video.